There is a goodbye most people never understand. It doesn't come with shouting. It doesn't come with closure. It doesn't even come with a final conversation. It comes quietly, almost gently, from someone who still loves you. And that is the part the world refuses to talk about. People assume empaths walk away because love died. They believe distance means indifference. They believe silence means someone stopped caring. But the truth is far more uncomfortable than that. Empaths rarely leave when love is dead. They leave while love is still alive, still breathing, still aching inside their chest. They leave with tears no one sees. They leave while whispering apologies into the air, hoping the universe carries them to the person who never deserved to hear them spoken out loud. This is the goodbye no one notices. The goodbye that happens months before the actual exit. The goodbye that lives in long stares, in unanswered messages, in the slow softening of a voice that once fought to be heard. By the time an empath physically walks away, they have already left 100 times in silence. They have already mourned the relationship while standing inside it. They have already buried the version of themselves that kept hoping. And maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you've been the one who stayed too long, loved too deeply, explained too much, and still walked away with guilt instead of relief. Maybe you've replayed your goodbye 1,000 times wondering if you were too sensitive, too distant, too cold. You weren't. You were simply done betraying yourself for someone who confused your patience for permission. Walking away while still loving someone is not weakness. It is not coldness. It is not a failure of the heart. It is the most painful form of self-respect a human being can practice. Because to leave someone you stopped loving is easy. But to leave someone you still love, still think about, still pray for in the quiet hours of the night, that takes a strength most people will never understand. This is the goodbye no one saw coming. And tonight, we're finally going to talk about why it happens. Long before the empath ever learned the word boundary, they learned how to disappear inside other people's emotions. They learned it young, too young. Before they understood what was happening, they were already absorbing the moods of the room, reading the tension in their parents' silence, sensing the sadness behind a smile, feeling things that weren't theirs to feel. They became emotional translators in a world that never asked if they wanted the job. And no one ever told them this was unusual. No one ever said, "This is not your weight to carry." So they carried it, quietly, faithfully, for years. The empath grew up believing love meant labor. That to be valuable, they had to be useful. That to be wanted, they had to be needed. They confused exhaustion with devotion. They confused emotional caretaking with closeness. They became the listener everyone called at midnight, the friend who held space for breakdowns, the partner who absorbed every storm without ever asking for shelter themselves. And somewhere along the way, they stopped noticing they were the only one giving. Because that's the quiet tragedy of being an empath. You don't realize you're overgiving. You think it's normal. You think everyone feels this much, sees this much, carries this much. You think love is supposed to feel heavy. You think loyalty is supposed to feel like sacrifice. You think being the strong one is a compliment, not a sentence. So you keep showing up. You keep softening for people who only sharpen against you. You keep explaining yourself to those who never tried to understand. You keep forgiving the same wound delivered in different costumes. And every time you give, something inside you quietly chips away. But you don't stop. Because stopping feels like failure. Stopping feels like abandoning them. And empaths would rather abandon themselves than abandon the people they love. That is the weight no one sees. The invisible tax of being emotionally aware in a world that rewards emotional avoidance. The exhaustion of being the only person in the room who feels everything fully. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who lean on you, but never lean toward you. You become the safe place for everyone else, while quietly wondering where your own safe place is supposed to be. And here is what no one warns you about. The world will not protect the empath. The world will use them. Friends will come for advice and disappear when you need it. Partners will pour their pain into you and complain when you finally feel tired. Family will demand your patience and call you cold the moment you set a limit. The people who took the most from you will be the first to call you selfish the moment you stop giving. And it will break something in you that words cannot fully describe. Because the deepest pain isn't being unloved. The deepest pain is loving people who only love what you do for them. It's being the strong one until you crack and realizing no one ever asked if you were okay. It's holding everyone together while quietly falling apart. It's pouring into people who never noticed you were emptying. It's being praised for your patience while drowning in silence. It's smiling at the people who consume you, because somewhere deep inside, you still believe love means staying, even when it costs you everything. And maybe you've lived this. Maybe you've been the listener, the fixer, the calm voice in everyone else's chaos. Maybe you've spent years confusing emotional labor with love. Maybe you've mistaken exhaustion for loyalty and silence for strength. Maybe you've been the person who held everything together while no one bothered to ask how heavy it was. This is where the story of the empath begins. Not with betrayal, not with heartbreak, but with the quiet, slow erosion of someone who gave more than they had, to people who never noticed how much it cost. This is the weight they carried alone. And tonight, we begin to understand why one day, without warning, they finally set it down. There is something deeply hidden inside the way an empath loves. Something most people, including the empath themselves, never see until it has already cost them years of their life. Empaths don't fall in love with people. They fall in love with potential. They fall in love with the version of someone that exists in glimpses, in soft moments, in late-night confessions, in the rare seconds when the other person finally drops their armor and reveals the soul underneath. And once an empath sees that hidden version, they spend years loving it as if it were the whole person. They spend years waiting for that glimpse to become permanent. They spend years believing that if they just love hard enough, patiently enough, deeply enough, that buried version will finally come to the surface and stay. But potential is a beautiful prison. It convinces you that what could be is more real than what is. It tricks you into mistaking hope for reality and patience for love. It makes you loyal to a future that may never exist, while quietly betraying the present that is hurting you. And that is the first hidden pattern beneath an empath's love. They are not loving the person in front of them. They are loving the person they believe is trapped inside them. They are loving the wounded child they sense behind the cold adult. They are loving the soul they feel, even when the behavior keeps proving otherwise. This is why empaths stay so long. Not because they are weak, not because they lack standards, but because they see something no one else can see. They see the goodness underneath the chaos. They see the hurt underneath the harshness. They see the human underneath the wall. And once they see it, they cannot unsee it. So they stay. They explain. They soften. They forgive. They wait. They tell themselves, he's not really like this. She's not really like this. They've just been hurt. They've just been through too much. They just need someone who finally understands them. And that someone, the empath decides, will be them. But here is the truth that takes years to accept. You cannot love someone into becoming who you believe they could be. You cannot heal someone who is committed to their wound. You cannot save someone who treats your love as proof that they don't have to change. Potential is not a relationship. Potential is a fantasy you are quietly performing in, alone, while the other person enjoys being loved without ever having to grow. And then there is the second hidden pattern, the one that lives even deeper, the one that controls the empath without them realizing it. The nervous system. The empath did not just learn to feel deeply. They learned to feel deeply in chaos. They grew up reading rooms that were unstable. They grew up tuning into the moods of unpredictable people. They grew up surviving environments where love and pain often arrived in the same hand. And so their nervous system, the most powerful storyteller inside the human body, slowly began to associate intensity with connection, anxiety with love, tension with closeness, unpredictability with passion. This is the part no one tells you. When peace feels boring to you, that is not your soul speaking. That is your nervous system telling you what it was trained to call home. When calm love feels strange and chaotic love feels familiar, that is not chemistry. That is conditioning. When someone hurts you and your heart pulls toward them harder, that is not destiny. That is a trauma loop wearing the costume of love. The empath often confuses the rush of survival with the warmth of connection. They mistake the adrenaline of walking on eggshells for the spark of attraction. They feel intensity and call it intimacy. They feel pain and call it depth. And this is why empaths so often end up with the wrong people again and again, in different forms, in different faces, in different versions of the same wound. It is not bad luck. It is not random. It is a pattern. The empath is not chasing love. They are unknowingly chasing the emotional environment they grew up in, hoping this time, finally, they can rewrite the ending. They are loving people who feel familiar, not people who feel right. They are choosing partners who feel like home, even when home was never safe. And the cruelest part is this. The empath believes their love is healing the other person, when in reality, the relationship is reinforcing the very wound that drew them in. Every time they tolerate disrespect, the wound deepens. Every time they justify cruelty as confusion, the wound deepens. Every time they accept crumbs and call it love, the wound deepens. The relationship is not progressing. It is repeating. It is recycling old pain in new packaging. And the empath, blinded by hope and conditioned by chaos, keeps mistaking the loop for love. There comes a moment, eventually, when the empath begins to feel something they cannot yet name. A heaviness, a confusion, a quiet voice that whispers, "This isn't love, this is something else." They start to notice that the relationship only feels alive during conflict, only feels passionate during reconciliation, only feels meaningful when it is hurting. They start to see that the calm moments feel rare, fragile, almost staged. They start to realize that they have been performing emotional CPR on a connection that was never truly breathing. And maybe you felt this. Maybe you've loved someone who only became soft after they hurt you. Maybe you've waited for the version of them that only appeared during apologies. Maybe you've called your exhaustion devotion, your anxiety chemistry, your suffering depth. Maybe you've spent years loving the potential of someone while losing the reality of yourself. This is the pattern hidden beneath the empath's love. Not weakness, not foolishness, but a deep, ancient confusion between love and labor, between intensity and connection, between potential and truth. And once an empath finally sees this pattern, something inside them begins to shift. Slowly, quietly, permanently. Because once you see the loop, you can never fully unsee it. And the moment you stop confusing chaos for love is the moment your real awakening begins. The moment everything changes for an empath is almost never loud. It is not a betrayal caught red-handed. It is not a screaming match in the middle of the night. It is not a dramatic exit with slammed doors and final words. The real turning point is quieter than that. Softer, almost embarrassingly ordinary. It happens in a moment so still, so small, that someone watching from the outside would never know a soul just woke up. It might happen while making tea, while folding clothes, while staring at a message that took 3 days to arrive, while sitting across from someone who is physically present but emotionally somewhere else. The empath suddenly stops mid-thought. Something inside them goes quiet. Not sad, not angry, just quiet. And in that quiet, for the first time in a very long time, they hear themselves clearly. They hear the truth they have been drowning out for months, maybe years, with excuses, with hope, with patience, with explanations. And the truth is devastatingly simple. This is not love. This is not closeness. This is not what a real connection feels like. For years, the empath has been doing something exhausting without realizing it. They have been translating silence into busyness, translating coldness into stress, translating neglect into communication problems, translating bare minimum effort into deep love that just expresses itself differently. They have been working overtime in their own mind, building elaborate explanations to protect a connection that was never protecting them. And in this quiet moment, the translations stop. The mind finally lets the heart speak. And the heart says what the mind kept silencing. It was never confusing. It was just painful to admit. This is the moment something inside the empath breaks open. Not breaks down, breaks open. Because there is a difference. Breaking down is collapse. Breaking open is revelation. And what spills out in this moment is not just sadness. It is clarity. Years of clarity that were waiting behind the wall of hope. Years of small moments that suddenly line up like evidence. The unanswered calls, the half-hearted affection, the constant feeling of being slightly invisible even while being held. The way they had to ask and ask and ask for things that should have been freely given. The way love was always something they had to earn, never something they were simply offered. And in this quiet moment, the empath finally feels the truth instead of explaining it away. They stop asking why someone treats them this way. They stop wondering what they did wrong. They stop building theories about the other person's childhood, trauma, fear of intimacy, attachment style. None of it matters anymore. Because the question is no longer why is this happening? The question becomes, Why have I been allowing this for so long? That single question changes everything. Because the moment an empath turns the question inward, they stop being a victim of the relationship and start becoming a witness to themselves. They see how much of their light they dimmed to keep someone comfortable. They see how often they apologized for feeling too much. They see how many times they betrayed their own intuition to protect someone else's ego. And it does not fill them with rage. It fills them with something far more powerful. Sorrow. Soft, deep, sacred sorrow. The kind of sorrow that washes the soul clean. This is the turning point. Not the fight. Not the betrayal. Not the goodbye. The turning point is the silence. The stillness. The moment the empath stops translating and finally listens. The moment pain stops being suffering and starts becoming awareness. The moment the soul whispers what the mind has been refusing to hear. And once that whisper is heard, it cannot be unheard. Something has shifted. Something has opened. Something has begun. And the empath, without even realizing it yet, has just taken the first real step toward coming home to themselves. After the awakening, something quiet begins to die inside the empath. Not their kindness, not their depth, not their capacity to love. What dies is the version of them that believed love had to hurt to be real. What dies is the part of them that confused self-abandonment with devotion. What dies is the identity built around being needed, being useful, being the one who always understands, always forgives, always stays. And the death of that identity is not loud. It is not dramatic. It happens in small, almost invisible decisions that slowly rewrite who they are. The empath stops explaining themselves. That is the first sign. For years, they treated explanation as a bridge, believing that if they could just find the right words, the right tone, the right amount of patience, the other person would finally understand them. But now, something has shifted. They realize that people who want to understand you don't need a paragraph. And people who don't want to understand you won't, no matter how beautifully you explain. So the empath puts the words down, quietly, permanently. And in that silence, something powerful is born. They stop begging, not just out loud, but inside themselves too. They stop begging for attention from people who only notice them when it is convenient. They stop begging for consistency from people who only show up when they need something. They stop begging for love from people who treat their presence as optional. The begging dies, and in its place, a strange new feeling rises. Standards. Real ones. The kind that don't bend just because someone is charming, familiar, or hard to let go of. The old empath chased understanding. The new empath chooses peace. The old empath shrank to fit into relationships built on their smallness. The new empath takes up exactly as much space as they need and refuses to apologize for it. The old empath performed loyalty. The new empath practices discernment. And this is where self-respect stops being a concept they read about and starts becoming a reflex they live by. They no longer have to think about it. Their body simply refuses what once destroyed them. Their soul simply walks away from what once shrank them. And here is what no one tells you about this stage. It feels unfamiliar. It feels almost uncomfortable. Because for years, the empath confused chaos with love, and now calm feels foreign. For years, they confused exhaustion with loyalty, and now rest feels suspicious. For years, they confused being chosen with being valued, and now choosing themselves feels selfish. But underneath that discomfort, something true is happening. The empath is finally, quietly, becoming someone they were never allowed to be. And then comes the part that surprises everyone, including the empath themselves. The strength. The unexpected, terrifying, beautiful strength that rises from the same sensitivity the world once mocked them for. People assumed their softness made them weak. People assumed their feelings made them fragile. People assumed their kindness made them easy to manipulate. They were wrong. Devastatingly wrong. Because what was once the empath's wound is slowly becoming their radar. What was once their pain is slowly becoming their power. The empath now feels what others miss. They sense the lie before it leaves someone's mouth. They notice the inconsistency between someone's words and their energy. They read silences, micro-expressions, sudden tone shifts, the small hesitations people don't even know they are giving away. Where they once absorbed everything blindly, they now observe everything precisely. Their sensitivity has not disappeared. It has simply graduated. It is no longer a sponge. It is a mirror, a scanner, a quiet form of intelligence most people will never develop. And the most powerful weapon they discover is one no one taught them: silence. The empath stops reacting, stops defending, stops performing emotions for people who only weaponize them. They no longer chase clarity and arguments designed to confuse them. They no longer over-explain to people committed to misunderstanding them. They simply go quiet. And in that silence, they finally hear what their own intuition has been trying to say for years. Their silence is not coldness. Their silence is not avoidance. Their silence is sovereignty. It is the sound of someone who has stopped auditioning for love. Manipulation cannot survive in this new presence. Guilt trips bounce off them. Emotional pressure no longer moves them. Subtle insults no longer rearrange their self-worth. They see the patterns now: the push and pull, the breadcrumbing, the intermittent affection used to keep them chasing, the performative apologies that change nothing. They see it all, clearly, calmly, almost gently. And the people who once controlled them with chaos suddenly find themselves powerless in front of someone who no longer flinches. This is where the empath becomes the person they were always becoming: calmer, quieter, harder to deceive, impossible to manipulate. They still love deeply, but they no longer love desperately. They still feel everything, but they no longer drown in it. They still care about people, but they no longer abandon themselves to prove it. Their love has not died. Their love has matured. It has standards now. It has direction. It has a home, and that home is no longer outside of them. And then comes the deepest understanding of all. The empath realizes that walking away from someone they still love is not the end of love. It is the beginning of self-loyalty. They realize that some people are meant to be loved from a distance, with no contact list, no closure, just quiet release. They realize that protecting their peace is not betrayal. It is devotion in its highest form. It is choosing the soul over the story. It is choosing truth over hope. It is choosing themselves, finally, after a lifetime of choosing everyone else first. They are no longer the person who stays until they break. They are no longer the person who confuses suffering with depth. They are no longer the person who pours into empty wells and calls it love. They have become someone different, someone whole, someone harder to lose because they no longer lose themselves. And maybe, just maybe, this is who you are quietly becoming too. Not bitter, not cold, not closed, just finally, beautifully, unmistakably loyal to your own soul. In the end, the empath learns something most people spend their whole lives running from. Sometimes love is not lost. Sometimes love is outgrown. Sometimes the person you walked away from was not wrong for the world, just wrong for the version of you that finally remembered who they were. Sometimes leaving is not the death of love. It is the highest form of it. Because the deepest love an empath ever gives is not always to the person they stayed with. It is to the person they finally became after they let go. There is a strange peace that arrives after the goodbye. Not the peace of forgetting, not the peace of no longer caring, but the peace of finally stopping the war inside yourself. The peace of no longer fighting to be understood by someone who never planned to understand you. The peace of choosing your own soul, even when your heart was still whispering their name. And maybe tonight, you are sitting with your own quiet goodbye, the one you whispered into the dark, the one no one ever heard, the one that still aches in places you don't talk about. If so, know this: you did not leave because you stopped loving. You left because you finally started loving yourself the same way you loved them. And that is not a loss. That is a return. If something in this spoke to a part of you that has been waiting to be heard, stay close. Subscribe and walk this journey with us, because becoming whole again is not a single moment. It is a slow, sacred unfolding. And you don't have to do it alone. Some goodbyes don't break you. Some goodbyes are the first time you ever truly meet yourself.